With the Edmonton Oilers having off until Friday, it's natural discussion. What should the lineup look like after such a long layoff?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, the Oilers have a weird kink in their schedule here where they're off from this past Saturday when they beat up on the Rangers all the way through next Friday where they're going to take on Utah. They have a few players who are dealing with injuries. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what the optimal deployment of their lineup is. Of course, that's the title of this episode. So our first segment, we're going to talk about our working theory as far as what the Oilers' best defensive pair combinations are so far. Our second segment, we're going to tackle what the forward group is looking like today. They practiced on Monday, even though they don't have a game until Friday. It's Kapanen filling in, missing a forward on the fourth line because Drake Caggiula was loaned back to Bakersfield with 4 days off. They needed him down in Bakersfield. Ditto for Josh Brown, who wasn't needed because they had 6 healthy defensemen today. But we'll talk defense, second segment. And then our third segment, we're going to talk about bridging the gap from the concept of this team to what they actually are and where they still need to improve. So at the outset, we know that the Oilers' defensive group is not as good as its forward group. Fundamentally, it's not. And the way hockey has gone over the last decade, this is where the sport is going. You need to invest more in your forward group than your defense, and that has repercussions. And the Oilers are feeling that, I would say, a little harsher than some teams who have made cutbacks or reorganized their roster, because some of this I don't think was initially on the table. You know, in an ideal world, the Oilers still have both Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. They probably don't have Ty Emberson. They definitely don't have Ty Emberson because they wouldn't have had to trade Cody Ceci. They probably, and I say probably, they don't have Travis Dermott. And they probably have Troy Stetcher as the 7th defenseman, and there's probably no Josh Brown, even though I know they signed Josh Brown when free agency opened. I think people forget that they had 3.7 million in Cody Ceci, the money they had tied up in Broberg. That's gone. You reinvested that money into your forward group. You know, I said this on Locked On NHL last Monday with Gil Martin. I said this at one point. I said this on the episode with Seth Topol, the crossover episode with the Wild. The Oilers invested like $10 million into their forward group that wasn't in their forward group last season. You know, they spent money on Skinner. They gave Adam Henrique a raise in relation to his cap hit when they acquired him because the Ducks had retained some salary. So he got a raise. Corey Perry, he got like a $700,000 raise. And Arvidsson, who was not on the team last year, who made a little bit more than Warren Fogle did. So you reinvested your money in your forward group. And we're going to talk about the forwards in the second segment, so I don't want to jump ahead too far. But the Oilers spent more on their forward group, and that forward group has failed to live up to its expectations. And I think it's fair to question some of the forward group. And we'll talk more about that. I promise. I know I keep teasing it and I'm doing a good job of that, but I promise we are going to talk about the forward group. The defense's job on this team, or any iteration of a team that is built like this with the star power up front and a handful, maybe 2 quality defensemen, then 1 semi-dependable one, and then a volatile one. You need your forward group to cover the mistakes. You know, we talk a lot about the margin of error within games, how generally speaking, it's really small. And the more star players you have, the more margin of error you typically have. Or if, you know, you're built in the vein of, say, the Carolina Hurricanes, the more depth you have, the more margin for error you have because you're not overly dependent on one group. But through the early phases of this season, it has felt that like in the games where McDavid and Draisaitl both don't have at least 3 points apiece, they're going to lose most of those games, at least so far. And look, there's plenty of time for that to change. They need to get guys healthy. But Matthias Janmark is third on the team in even strength points right now. They do not have the complementary scoring so far that they thought they would. And that is fundamentally tied to the defense. And it's funny, I did my Rangers podcast earlier in the day on Monday, where I'm recording this episode of Locked On Oilers on Monday night ahead for Tuesday morning, so it's with you on your commute. But I talked about this on the Rangers podcast, and the Oilers have a very similar affliction where their best players are not grinded out cycle guys. They are transition, they are up and down, and they are reliant on skill to win their games. And against bad teams, you can pick opponents apart. You can use your skill to force them into mistakes. But the thing for the Oilers and for the Rangers, their defensive woes are tied to their offense. And the Rangers are also having a really hard time scoring at 5-on-5 right now. And it is tied to their defensive effort. And I think the Oilers, I think their forwards in particular, need to accept that, especially in the non-McDavid minutes, they need to have more of a commitment to team defense. And that means coming back to back check. That means pressuring guys who have the puck. That also means making yourself available to receive passes from your defensemen. That is really one of the telltale signs of a team that is struggling in transition. And I made this comparison earlier, and it's not perfect, obviously, but think about how your knee works. You think about the tendons that are connecting the two joints that make it so you're not grinding bone on bone when you step. Hypothetically, if you didn't have ligaments in your knee, and this happens to athletes from time to time, that they have to get their meniscus or one of their ACL, MCL, PCLs grinded down a little bit to smaller because it's flared up, it's torn, whatever. They have bone on bone grinding, and you can still walk like that, but it's really uncomfortable. It's painful. It hurts, but you can still walk and get around like that. And that's what a team with poor transition play is. It is bone on bone. Sure, you can get by, and because the Oilers have some supremely talented players, they can get by doing the bone on bone comparison, if you will. But they need more from their group, especially defensively. And we're going to talk about that. And then as far as the defense, the one thing I wanted to make sure I got in here, I am not sure if Brett Kulak is going to be able to play the volume of minutes he's playing right now. He's on pace for his highest career average time on ice as an NHLer in year. I want to get this right. He's been in the NHL for quite a while, so I want to click over to my notes here. He played one game in 2014-2015. He played 8 games in 2015-2016. Played 21 games in 2016-2017. His first full NHL season, 2017-2018, where he averaged 12.59 per game. Brett Kulak has never averaged more than 18 minutes in a game. 18 minutes per game in a season until this season. Right now, he's averaging 19 minutes and 14 seconds. I understand the Oilers have had some injuries on the back end, so he's played a little bit more. But I really do think there's a strong argument to keep playing Kulak this much, especially the results he's gotten with Darnell Nurse. We've spent the early phases of this season, the 20-some-odd games the Oilers have played, looking for the Oilers to get the optimal pair. And Nurse and Kulak have good results. They've played 87 minutes together. In those 87 minutes, they have 61% of the scoring chances, 75% of the goals for, 66% of the expected goals, 62% of the high danger goal chances. They have a 5.17 shooting and a 972 save, which leads me to believe that that's relatively sustainable. That save percentage is going to come down a little bit, but that shooting percentage should also go up. I understand they're not going to get the McDavid minutes. They might get the Draisaitl minutes, but if those results are relatively sticky, I think you keep running Kulak 19 minutes a game until it breaks down. But we're coming up here on our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll tackle what the forward group will probably look like when Victor Arvidsson and Zach Hyman, who are both out with injuries right now, come back, coming up next on this edition of Locked On Oilers. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. If you were to open the PrizePicks app or go over to their website, you could do whether Jack Hughes is going to have more than 4 shots on goal, if Artemi Panarin is going to have more than 1 assist, if John Tavares is going to win more than 9 faceoffs. And this week, on Thanksgiving, PrizePicks has a special free square where Tyreek Hill only needs to receive half a receiving yard for the projection to hit. If you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you will win real cash. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember, download the PrizePicks app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are unpacking potential lineup changes and ideas for what a fully healthy Oilers lineup is going to look like. Now, we spent a lot of time unpacking why the defensive issues aren't necessarily just about the defensemen. It's a nuanced point. It's something that you might not talk a lot about or hear people talk a lot about, but it's true, especially on a team like this that has high-end offensive players. You need a fundamental commitment to strong team defense to be effective. And that starts with your stars. And right now, the Oilers are in a weird boat because the under the hood numbers possession-wise are pretty good. You know, the Oilers are winning the chance battle. They're winning the expected goals battle, the high danger chance battle. Most nights, they are controlling play. Granted, that's come in games where they've been behind, and in games where a team is trailing, they're going to have the puck more because the other team is going to be more passive, more defensive, to try and prevent big rushes, to prevent swings of momentum, if you will. But with Bouchard and Ekholm entrenched and an unwillingness to split them up, Kulak and Nurse for your second pair, and then Stetcher Emberson for your third pair. That would be my preference as far as the defensive deployments. I think Emerson in a smaller role has proven that he is coming along. I think he needs a lot of repetitions. I think people are forgetting he does not have a lot of NHL experience coming into this year. He only had 27 games of NHL experience. He's already almost at that number for the entirety of his NHL career so far in this season alone, and we're only in the first month of November, so keep that in mind. I think Kulak, if you keep running him out there and he keeps playing well, you do it until the wheels come off. And then as far as the forward group, so at practice on Monday, the forward group was Ryan Nugent Hopkins, Connor McDavid, Kasperi Kapanen first line, Vasily Podkolzin, Leon Draisaitl, Connor Brown third line, Jeff Skinner, Adam Henrique, Matthias Janmark third line, and then Derek Ryan, Corey Perry on the third line. And like we had said in the intro, Drake Caggiula was loaned back to Bakersfield. Drake Caggiula will more likely than not be in the lineup on Friday against Utah, but the Oilers, knowing they have these days off, they loaned him back to the AHL so he could play because Bakersfield has games during this week. But I think, and I should say this, Chris Knobloch confirmed on Monday that Zach Hyman and Victor Arvidsson would both be at least 5 to 8 more days, so probably not until early next week would those guys be available to play. So we can safely assume that when Zach Hyman is healthy and ready to play, he's going back to McDavid's. I think, if anything, the Ryan Nugent Hopkins spot up with McDavid is more likely to change. I think you have heard me say on this show quite a few times, I think Ryan Nugent Hopkins is probably better suited for a third line role the way he's performing so far. I don't think he's cooked as far as being an NHL player, but I don't think he has top 6 upside anymore. I think his skating leaves a little bit to be desired, and frankly, his play around the net isn't where it needs to be, especially if he's going to be in a complementary role to Hyman and McDavid. But for now, I assume the first line is going to be McDavid, Nugent Hopkins, and Hyman. The second line, I think you're absolutely going to see Podkolzin stay with Draisaitl. I think that duo is pretty firmly entrenched, set in stone. Podkolzin finally got his first goal of the season against the Rangers on Saturday. That was good to see. I think Podkolzin brings something that the Oilers just don't have a lot of He brings a forecheck. He brings a tenacity. And frankly, he plays aggressively. And the Oilers need more guys who are willing to play with a little bit of crash test dummy to their game and go win pucks. And I think that complements Draisaitl very well, giving somebody who's a multifaceted player like Draisaitl, who's a high-end goal scorer, leads league in goals, and also a really dynamic playmaker, somebody who can set up people from anywhere. Giving him a high-end puck retriever like Podkolzin is really good lineup construction. And I'm glad that even if it took a little while for the Oilers to get here, that they were able to identify that Podkolzin had this in his game, and more so, that Draisaitl wants to play with him. Because I know I can speak to this from experience as somebody who has star players on their favorite team. When the Rangers first got Panarin, they ran a cacophony of right wingers on his line with him and Ryan Strome and subsequently Vincent Trocheck over the last 4 or 5 seasons, because Panarin didn't like playing with a lot of them. And there was a lot of conjecture that, well, he doesn't want to play with Lafreniere. He doesn't want to play with Kakko 2-3 years ago because they're inexperienced. They don't know what he wants to do. For someone like Draisaitl to look at Podkolzin and say, I can do something with this, that's encouraging. That shows me a player who's willing to find a way to make it work to help their team. Next, the third line, I think you're going to see the Oilers go back to what they had done in the playoffs last year and what Chris Knoblauch has been very steadfast about keeping together, and that's Janmark on the left, Henrique in the middle, and Connor Brown on the right. I know the results, especially in terms of offense, haven't necessarily been there for that trio as much as they were in the postseason. The penalty kill has not been that great this year as opposed to in the playoffs last year where they were borderline invincible. I think you're going to see that group stay together. And this brings us a real conundrum. You have yet to hear me say where I think Jeff Skinner should slide in when this lineup is fully healthy. And I think that naturally lends itself to the question, well, if he can't get in on the third line with Henrique and Connor Brown, are we putting Janmark on the fourth line and taking like Corey Perry out? Are we putting Jeff Skinner on the first line and putting Nugent Hopkins on the third line and then moving someone from that third line, whether it's Brown or Janmark, depending on the handedness preference, to the fourth line? What's our plan here to get Jeff Skinner going? Because Skinner, as much as he struggled so far this year, and I'm clicking over here on Hockey Reference because I want to have the numbers in front of me, he's just not playing a lot. And I understand he's in a different phase of his career, but last year he had 24 goals, 22 assists, playing 15.60 per game. He's under 14 minutes this year for the first time ever in his NHL career. He is at 13.44 per game of average time on ice. The first time as a 32-year-old with 15 years of NHL experience, not even as a rookie. Granted, he won the Calder as an 18-year-old on a Hurricanes team, playing 16.44 per game. But looking over here, man, you signed a player, and look, you can tell me whatever you want about Jeff Jackson doing the job he did in free agency. It really feels, and look, this is anecdotal. I cannot say this authoritatively because I have not asked Chris Knoblauch. I haven't asked Jeff Jackson. It doesn't feel like there was a plan for Arvidsson and Skinner other than these guys are good. We'll figure out where they fit. And that's one of my big pet peeves in professional sports. And I talk about this all the time. I spent like 20 minutes on Liberty Blue, the Rangers podcast I do today, talking about this. Just because you sign a player who was good somewhere else doesn't necessarily mean you understand what made them good there. I think Skinner has more to give the Oilers. We're going to take one final break, and then we're going to talk about how these lineup changes, my suggested lineup, would reflect and get the Oilers closer to their goal and what type of hockey they want to play, coming up right after this break. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. This week, it is, of course, American Thanksgiving. Bears, Lions, 12:30 Thursday afternoon. The Lions, 10.5-point favorites. That's an awfully big number. Thursday afternoon, the Giants and the Cowboys and what is surely going to be great background noise for a mid-afternoon nap where the Giants are 3.5-point underdogs on the road. And then finally, Thursday night, the Dolphins heading up to Green Bay where the wind chill is expected to be in the teens, where the Packers are 3.5-point favorites against Tua Tagovailoa and the playoff fighting for their lives, Miami Dolphins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Tuesday edition, Locked On Oilers, where we are unpacking what the Oilers' optimal lineup looks like with the players they have at their disposal. So, to recap, right now, they are down 2 forwards, and I should say 3. We know Drake Caggiula is going to be back for Friday, but they are technically down 3. So, they are down Arvidsson, and they are down Hyman. Hyman's coming back. He's playing with McDavid. We can assume that almost guaranteed. Because I don't think he's going on a line with Draisaitl and inconveniencing Arvidsson as well. I think, if anything, you are more likely to see Nugent Hopkins off of McDavid's line than Hyman off of McDavid's line. And I think at some point during the next few months, we will see the Oilers try Jeff Skinner with McDavid again. I know that's what we started the season with. We started with Skinner on McDavid's left, with Nugent Hopkins, with Skinner on McDavid's left, with Hyman on the other wing. We saw Arvidsson and Skinner with Draisaitl. We saw Brown, Janmark, Henrique, and then we saw Ryan, Phillip, etc. You get what I'm saying here. I think there's a strong argument that if the Oilers aren't going to give Jeff Skinner power play time, which they shouldn't, they shouldn't take Nuge off that spot, even if he's been cold based on his track record and what he brings as a distributor. If you want to put Skinner there, okay. Maybe you can convince me Skinner stays lower in the lineup. But there's nothing to be gained from playing Jeff Skinner 12 minutes a night with Derek Ryan and Corey Perry. Look, Ryan and Perry at times can get their cycle game going and do a nice job. Whenever they have one of those shifts where they just put heat on the other team's defense, they don't even really get offense generated, but they force them to play defense. They tire them out. That's a good shift from your fourth line. The low event player, the guy who's going to keep the puck moving, get the other team to move their feet, put heat on the other team, force them to play defense. That's a strong composition. And then when you look at the defense and you start to unpack that end of it, we have solutions in-house. I still think you probably should split up Ekholm and Bouchard just to distribute the talent a little more evenly and distribute the risk throughout your lineup a little more evenly. I know I was reading in The Athletic this morning how much more work that Bouchard and Ekholm are getting against high-end opponents. They're getting almost 2 full minutes more per game against the other team's best players. And that works. And I do think the Oilers will be fine in those minutes with that type of workload increase. But I have to at times, and this is me monologuing out loud, my stream of consciousness, I have to at times accept that even if something might make sense as an external person, me sitting here doing a podcast, it's probably not going to be the same mindset for Chris Knobloch making his decisions as far as what he's trying to accomplish in those players' minutes. But with that in mind, knowing that they're not going to split up Ekholm and Bouchard, I think based on the result, you really have to give strong consideration to playing to Brett Kulak with Darnell Nurse. And look, I have been very, very, very hard on Darnell Nurse and his play so far. He's been a lot better over the last week and a half, 2 weeks. I think if you go and look at the time on ice numbers, his time on ice easing just a smidge, Kulak's going up, Kulak playing with Nurse, and then Emberson or Stetcher playing lower in the lineup. I think that's given the Oilers a little more stability. And now look, I'm not saying Nurse is doing a great job. I'm not saying that anything is set in stone. What I am saying is, with 86 minutes of sample, a 5-on-5 play, that is a decent sized amount of information to determine that a pair is functional. If the Oilers can get Bouchard and Ekholm, Nurse, Kulak both working reasonably well, then all Stetcher and Emberson need to do is not drown. And that's doable. Now, I don't think Emberson is a second pair guy yet. I think there's an outside chance he could develop into that. I don't think Troy Stetcher at this stage of his NHL career can be a second pair defenseman full time. I think in spurts, it's probably okay because of his mobility and his puck skills, because as a smaller guy, as somebody who's, you would say, is more of an offensively inclined defenseman, having him out there with Nurse, who's really volatile and he makes good plays. The shorthanded goal was a good example of reading the defense, taking what the other team gave you and attacking and pouncing. But I do think Nurse is very scary. I think he's very sketchy when he's out there. The decisions he makes definitely can cause some worry. But you look at it like this. They are here at this point in the season, and they're not playing incredible hockey. They're 11-9-2. They're fourth in the Pacific. They're missing Arvidsson and Hyman. They've missed McDavid for a week. They've had Nurse be out for a week here or there. They have had some injuries. They are firmly in the mix. They still have plenty of room for the guys who are already here, not including trade deadline acquisitions, which will almost certainly happen. Not including acquisitions, there is enough room here to think that the Oilers can get not just to one level better, probably two levels better, in all honesty. I think if they can get a Hyman going, and I'm not saying anything nuts, but if Hyman can finish the year with like 27 goals, as cold as he started, that would tell me the Oilers made real progress this year. If they can find a role for Jeff Skinner where he can get to 15, 20 goals, that would tell me they did something. If Brett Kulak and Darnell Nurse can continue to decisively win their minutes as they have so far, where they have close to 60% of the scoring chances, they have 75% of the goals for, that shows me you recognize the problem, Nurse and Stetcher, Nurse and Emberson, etc. It shows me you understood the problem, you identified a solution, you tested the solution, the test went well, and then you corrected the mistake. In an ideal world, that's the feedback process in professional sports. You identify a problem, you propose a solution, you test the solution, you take the feedback, and you go from there. The Oilers very well might have solved their second pair defensive issues just by playing Kulak more. Now, we'll see. On Monday practice, Stetcher was playing with Nurse on the second pair, and Kulak was down on the third pair with Emberson. But we'll see. There's plenty of time between now and Friday. I am very curious to see what the lineup looks like come Friday. Maybe Hyman or Arvidsson forces their way back in a little earlier than expected, similarly to the way McDavid was supposed to be out 2 to 3 weeks and he was out 10 days. But that'll do it for this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. Please, if you could be so kind, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new episodes go live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow, where we are going to talk all about Jeff Skinner's season so far. And thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now, please go check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, where you can dominate your league mates with expert analysis from Steal and Flip. Available wherever you get your podcasts. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow all about Jeff Skinner. Till then, let's go Oilers.